Greetings, everyone. Tim Anderson here, aka Renfail. I just had a late shower. I almost never shower at night. I almost always shower in the mornings. But it was freezing cold all this day, so I suffered all the way up until recently. I just moved the space heater thing we've got. It's not a space heater. I don't know what these are called. Radiator um, by my desk because it's getting down to 40 degrees tonight. So this is perfect weather for reading books. Perfect weather for being underneath the covers. Last night I couldn't sleep. I was up all night. I ended up finishing off the first novel in the Thrawn trilogy, which was Heir to the Empire. It was just as good as I remembered it. And I'm about to dive back into the second book in the Robert Jordan Conan trilogy, the first Conan trilogy, tonight. But before we get to that, it's time for another reading in The Weave and the Void. We're going to be reading chapter 3 tonight. For those of you who are new here, The Weave and the Void is the intellectual property that we are developing. Myself, my brother Joey Anderson, and my wife Christina Barrios. We are the Wandering Hermits. You can find more information at wanderinghermits.com, weaveandthevoid.com, and of course our Patreon, patreon.com/wandering hermits. The Weave and the Void is a three-part project, if you will, that was previously codenamed Project Dramon, and it is compiled of this fantasy novel, as well as a 5th edition tabletop world setting and campaign modules, and a point-and-click adventure game called An Adventurer's Tale, the demo of which was released a couple of weeks back, so it's freely available if you want to go download that over at the Patreon page. And recently, I have been reading through the first few chapters of the book to celebrate the launch of all of our social media channels now that we have everything out in the open in November of 2021. So if you haven't watched the previous two episodes, don't forget you can. This will be the last reading because I'm only reading the first three chapters because those are the first three. The first three chapters are what make up the preview. We just did the updated version of the preview PDF a couple days ago. You can go get that downloaded over on the Patreon page. You can also check it out in the announcements section of our Discord. All the links for that are somewhere. If you're watching this on Twitch, they should be down below, and if you're watching them on YouTube, also they'll be down below. Without further ado, we're going to jump into chapter 3 tonight, which follows the adventures of our main characters so far, which are Thanon, Hylan, Firin, Althea, Lyanna, and Elder Byron Lightforge. We will be adding more characters. Actually, just talked about this in the brainstorming episode the other day, this past Wednesday. We are getting ready to chapter 10. Chapter 10 is publishing this Thursday, and we're ending part 1 of the novel, and then we're moving into chapters 11 and 12 for December, and we will be introducing a new character in the month of December. So if you want to read along with me as I go through the read through here, I'm dropping the link in the chat here on Twitch. And for those of you who are watching later on YouTube, the link will be down below. Yeah, accordingly. If you haven't already done so, make sure to, if you're here on Twitch watching this live, make sure to follow along here on Twitch. And of course, if you're watching YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates for future content. Because we're in lots of stuff now. We got a Dev Diary series, we got the Wednesday night stand-ups, we've got these read-throughs, we've got art streams from Chris coming up as she gets back, we got tabletop painting, miniature painting, we've got live writing sessions, a whole bunch of stuff on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all the places. Don't forget to join our Discord. All right. My alarm is sounding to tell me that it's time to do the chapter read. The next 2 hours were spent in joyful remembrance, the trio washing back stories from their youth with several mugs of Thanon's homemade ale. It had been almost 5 years since they had been in one room together, with Firin and Hylan busy out west between Forkland and Whitecliff, running a small but successful shipping agency that specialized in legitimate trade, along with a handful of off-the-book items for those clients who preferred their dealings, sans entanglement with church authorities. And with Firin's sea elf background and elven sloop, it had been a profitable venture since their last campaign together. "Where's Lyanna?" Farron's voice took on a more serious note as they finally reached a stopping point in their reverie. She had hoped to find the High Elf here with Thanon. She had raised the dwarf since he was a babe, rescued from the ambush that had killed his parents. The elven mage had been their stalwart leader for more than a century of adventures through the realms prior to Thanon settling down in Parthana, and she and Hylan busy with their own trade. Thanon jerked his head towards the Elven district, the central tower of the Circle of Mages just poking through the trees visible through the eastern window of the room where they now sat. Mage business, he replied with a grunt. Beyond me. All I know is there have been some tensions between the Circle and the Church, but it's nothing new there. Farron nodded. She was a druid by training, having spent several decades at sea aboard the vessels of her own people as a merchant mariner, learned in the ways of the wind and the water. But even though she wasn't part of the Circle of Mages, all elves were familiar with the group, mirrored after the legendary Tonia Hithal of the High Elves, from where all elvenkind traced their ancestry. The High Council, in the common tongue. Supposedly, the council still kept in touch with the High Council back in the elven capital of Maniala, pronounce that wrong. But she had never heard more than rumors. Her own people had not had contact with the High Elves since the day they had left their home city all those centuries ago along the Wood Elves, their cousin. The dockmaster wasn't exactly in a welcoming mood today. I wonder if that has anything to do with what's going on. Thanon shrugged and took another swallow of ale, draining his sixth cup in a mighty swallow. He belched into his forearm and wiped froth from his mustache. Greedy buggers always looking for coin above all else. I wager I've put 3 of his children through university at this point. Hylan let out a short laugh at the comment. No matter the years that had passed, the dwarf's time in the city hadn't lessened his wit. What of Bellion? He asked as he looked around. Thanon's cousin was noticeably absent. The dwarf spat into the dirt. Lazy bastard took a desk job black in Gleznabeer, if you can believe it. He shook his head. I didn't think he had it in him, let alone the stomach for those mountain dwarves. They were notoriously distrusting of the world beyond their gates, and he hadn't had even a single letter since Bellion had decided to return to the homeland and abandon his partnership in the forge they had founded together here in Parthana. Said he was tired of all the hustle and bustle of the humans, wanted good solid rock around him. Thanon heaved a deep sigh and stood with a grunt, making his way towards the half-sized barrel of ale in his living room bar. He turned the tap and poured his 7th mug in silence, then took a long swallow. He belched again and blinked twice. Had the room just spun? He shook his head and made his way back, sinking into the comforting embrace of the cushions. But where's the fun in burying your head in the rocks? Well, whatever's going on, the church seems serious about it. Hyland's voice was thoughtful as he turned his gaze from his friend towards the window and the city beyond the trees outside of Thanon's home. A plague is serious business, replied Fearon. She took a drink and pursed her lips. It's been, 174 years since Angoroya? 73, Hyland corrected her, his voice soft. He felt a sudden pang in his chest, one that had long been absent. It was lesser than it had been all those years ago, but as distant as the memory was, he could still recall their faces, the contorted limbs, the smell of rotting flesh and burned bodies. I'm sorry, lad. Thanon raised his mug in memory of the half-elf's family, while Fearon reached out a hand and squeezed her life partner's knee comfortingly. Hyland nodded his thanks, but his gaze remained troubled as he continued looking out the window. The next few minutes passed in silence, and their respective mugs were drained as they recalled the piles of burned corpses smoldering in the summer breeze. The magics of both the church and circle nearly depleted as they had struggled to finally contain the sickness. It had spread like wildfire in the summer heat, black boils and split skin, the wailing of the sick and dying, a constant thing that kept everyone awake for days on end. It had taken nearly a month for the combined efforts of elemental magic and quantum energy to finally turn the tide, and by then more than half the population of Angloria had been lost. Thankfully, the quarantine had kept the plague from spreading beyond the city walls, but only because it had been caught in time. Let's hope that's not the case, murmured Fearon into the stillness. They all nodded gravely and sank back into thoughtful silence, hoping that Alfio would bring back good news. The Chamber of Wisdom was full today for the first time in at least 2 years, if Byron's memory served. It was bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun reflecting off the bay, the entire eastern section of the room opening up to the massive balcony that overlooked the Plaza of the Innocents below. the raised dais in the center, the place from where the enlightened father addressed the masses each week. Voices were low and muted as the other elders murmured amongst themselves, all of them curious as to why they had been summoned. His stomach churned beneath the weight of what he suspected. He studied the faces of his peers and saw no worry that matched his own. Malcolm Renault, with his one half-closed eye, his head bowed slightly as he spoke in hushed tones with the man to his right. Ulrich Charn, the latter man's beard, as well trimmed as it ever was, if sporting more white than it had been the last time Byron had seen him. Both men seemed at ease and were chuckling over something said between them, no trace of concern whatsoever. Byron frowned and adjusted himself in his chair, the cushion beneath him feeling hard as stone despite its thickness, the room somehow hot and stuffy despite the ever-present breeze that kept the chamber cool even on the hottest of days, privilege afforded from its height at the top of the Vestige Temple looking out over the entirety of the city. The only thing that marred the view were those 8 towers on the eastern side of the bay, the blight that was the circle of mages and those fey sorcerers. He felt bile rising in his throat as the images from the morning floated back into his thoughts. Dozens of human bodies laid out on cold slabs beneath the city, not an elf, dwarf, brownie, or halfling among them. The central tower of the mages, rising high above the others, mocked him with its pristine whiteness, the setting sun reflecting off the surface and causing him to avert his eyes. He grimaced as he reached for the pitcher closest to him on the table and poured a healthy serving of red wine into the silver goblet in front of him, swallowing the bile down. He forced his breathing to slow and closed his eyes, silently asking forgiveness from her for yet another time today. The murmuring cut off, and there was the sound of chairs being pushed back and feet shuffling on the floor of the chamber. Byron opened his eyes to the sight of His Holiness, the enlightened Father, entering from the northern entrance to the room, the man's piercing green eyes visible even from this distance, his body covered in the aura of an eye that radiated out from the ring that rested on the index finger of his right hand, its faint blue glow barely visible, but nevertheless pulsating with power that Byron could feel even from this distance. His own ring echoed the same pulsating tempo, the quantum energies that entwined all of the elders, causing the room to begin to throb with a deep hum that was almost inaudible but could be felt in the very bones. As one, the elders bowed their heads as His Holiness approached the long marble table that stretched the length of the Chamber of Wisdom, and took his place at the gilded chair marked with the symbol of their faith, its golden rays resplendent against the bright white of the fabric, the black metal of the frame one of the few titanium remnants brought north from the time of the Quantum Wars. "Please, my children, be seated." The enlightened father's voice thrummed through the room, and Byron moved to sit alongside the rest of his brothers when His Holiness spoke again. Please remain standing, Elder Lightforge. Your testimony is vital to what we must decide today. Byron felt his heart lurch in his chest momentarily, a natural reaction to being singled out. He felt all eyes turn to him, and he swallowed against the lump in his throat. Why did he feel so nervous? This was not his first time addressing the chamber. He tried to still his mind and willed his back even straighter as he stood to attention. As some of you are aware, there is a sickness ravaging our city. The enlightened father's voice was calm, his words slow and measured as his eyes scanned the room, giving brief moments of direct contact with each and every one of his elders. A plague unlike any we have seen before, and one that resists even our holiest of relics. Murmurs sprung up around the chamber, and alarmed glances began to be cast about, mostly silenced as their leader raised his hand to quiet them. This is not Angloria, where the disease was difficult, but eventually overcome. She is testing us in a way that she has not done since the time of the Quantum Wars. His eyes scanned them all, piercing into their very souls. Some shivered under the raw power of that gaze, which slowly moved to Byron. He remained straight, his conviction strong. Please, tell us of your findings, Elder Lightforge. Byron swallowed against the dryness of his throat, wishing desperately that he did not want a swallow of wine as badly as he did. It is indeed worse than Angloria, your holiness. He swallowed again and pushed the nerves down. The death rate appears to be 100% in those infected, and most appear to die within 2 days of first infection. More murmurings around the table, and this time the enlightened father did nothing to stop them. Byron felt his courage growing as he continued. My investigations have found no visible cause of the plague. In Angloria it was rats, as the elders here might recall. Many nods from around the table. My only conclusion is that the plague must be magical in nature. His last statement was met with gasps from some, widened eyes from others, and pursed lips from the remainder. His Holiness raised a hand to calm the table. What evidence do you have to support this claim? Byron licked his lips nervously before he spoke. I have yet to see a single Fey affected, enlightened father. The only ones who appear to be dying are our own people. What else could it be but Fey magic used to poison those who they view as invaders ever since our arrival? Murmurs became shouts as the chamber erupted into chaos with the accusation, and Elder Byron Lightforge felt the eyes of His Holiness burning into his soul. He prayed to her for strength. And so ends Chapter 3 of Book 1 of The Weave in the Void. If you would like to read the rest of the chapters, don't forget to head on over to the Patreon page. Links are below. It is patreon.com/wandering hermits. Chapters are published twice a month on Thursdays, complete with chapter art from Christina in the vein of the Dragonlance Chronicles. So if you like those types of stories and those types of books, you'll want to pick up a subscription over at the Patreon page so you can get access to all of the chapters that they are published, along with all of the other things that we do on the Patreon page related to the books, the point and click adventure game, the tabletop setting and modules, and all the things that we do. Don't forget to join the Discord. You can hang out with us in our community over there. If you're watching this on Twitch, of course, don't forget to follow along here on the Twitch channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates for future content as we continue to produce lots of fun stuff for everybody around the Weave in the Void. And of course, don't forget, you can come hang out with us anytime we're live on Twitch. We do lots of different things. We look forward to everybody following along. Thanks so much for your attention. Don't forget, if you want to read the chapter yourself, the links are below. You can also head over to the Patreon page and pick up the prologue preview, which includes the first 3 chapters and all of the artwork in a downloadable PDF, which is a lot of fun if you like to read in your spare time as opposed to going to the Patreon page. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Stay safe, stay healthy. Peace.